Imagine this. Clint Eastwood, the legendary icon of Hollywood, walks into one of the most luxurious restaurants in Los Angeles, dressed in simple attire, a polo shirt and trousers. Not a single person recognizes him, but this moment marks the beginning of a disastrous mistake. A young waitress, brimming with arrogance, tries to humiliate the man she perceives as ordinary. Little does she know, Clint is not just a regular patron. He's the owner of the restaurant. What unfolds next is not just a priceless lesson, but a legendary tale delivered in classic Clint Eastwood fashion. Calm, yet commanding. Located in the heart of Beverly Hills, the Grand Oak Dining Room stands as a symbol of luxury and sophistication, a destination not to be missed by Los Angeles' elite. On a bustling Friday evening, the restaurant buzzes with laughter and lively conversations. Young entrepreneurs, clad in meticulously tailored suits, discuss ambitious projects. Social media influencers capture photos of golden, glittering desserts, ready to amass thousands of likes. Meanwhile, old money families quietly enjoy their weekly traditional dinners, each detail radiating elegance and refinement. Amidst this opulent atmosphere, in a corner of the room, a middle-aged man sits quietly at a familiar table. He wears a simple gray polo shirt and trousers, his appearance a stark contrast to the glamour surrounding him. In his hand, a glass of whiskey glimmers softly under the light of crystal chandeliers above. This man is none other than Clint Eastwood, a living Hollywood legend. Yet it seems no one pays him any attention. His presence is unassuming, requiring no fanfare, a reflection of the demeanor he has carried throughout his life. The seasoned staff at the restaurant know this distinguished guest well. Clint is a longtime regular, a man of calm composure who values peace and quiet. But for Rachel, a new waitress at the Grand Oak Dining Room, things are entirely different. Newly employed, Rachel is full of enthusiasm but carries the inexperience of someone just starting out. She has never heard the name Clint Eastwood. To Rachel, he is simply a middle-aged man, plainly dressed, unremarkable amidst a crowd of dazzling personalities. Rachel had recently graduated from a prestigious hospitality school in New York, carrying with her aspirations of excelling in the world of high-end service. With confidence and ambition, she found herself working at the Grand Oak Dining Room, a hub for the most famous and powerful individuals in Beverly Hills. Rachel always sought to impress customers with her professionalism and enthusiasm, but behind her bright smile, she often judged people based on appearances. When she saw Clint, Rachel made an instant judgment. He wore a simple gray polo shirt and trousers, nothing remarkable amidst a space filled with tailored suits and lavish evening gowns. To Rachel, he was just an ordinary middle-aged man, unworthy of her special attention. Rachel approached Clint's table with an air of confidence, tinged with subtle arrogance. "Good evening, sir. May I introduce today's specials to you?" she asked, her tone polite, but her eyes betraying a hint of indifference. Clint looked up, his sharp eyes meeting hers. Without haste or reaction, he smiled faintly and nodded. "I'll have the premium Angus steak and a glass of whiskey." "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and calm. His brief response, combined with his composed demeanor, left Rachel slightly taken aback. She couldn't quite understand why a man with such a plain appearance exuded such an inexplicable allure. However, she quickly brushed off the thought and resumed her duties, completely unaware that she had just served a Hollywood legend. Clint remained seated, quietly enjoying his meal with a serene air about him. He didn't get caught up in the noise around him, didn't check his phone, or pay any attention to curious glances. He was entirely focused on his meal, sipping his whiskey slowly, as if savoring a rare moment of peace. From a distance, Rachel observed him and noticed a subtle distinction. What drew attention wasn't glamour, but an unshakable aura of quiet authority. "Excuse me, sir," Rachel began, her tone soft but tinged with subtle sarcasm. "It seems you've been sitting here for quite a while. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable moving to the bar." Clint slowly looked up, his cold, steady gaze, one so familiar to audiences from his iconic roles, meeting hers. "I'm fine here," he replied succinctly, his voice firm but free of any ostentation. Rachel glanced quickly at the watch on her wrist, her eyes briefly flicking toward a group of young patrons waiting for a table. She smiled, as if calculating something. We have a special menu designed exclusively for the bar area, she added, her words deliberate. I think those items might be a better fit for a more relaxed atmosphere. Clint didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lifted his whiskey glass, taking a slow sip, his composure untouched by Rachel's thinly veiled suggestion. After a brief pause, he spoke, his voice measured yet resolute. I like it here. The simplicity of his statement, weighted like a mountain, left Rachel momentarily stunned. She couldn't fathom how an older man, dressed so plainly, could command such an imposing presence. The confidence he exuded wasn't drawn from his outward appearance but from his demeanor. Something profound, elusive, and entirely undeniable. Rachel stood silent for a few moments, unsure how to respond. Meanwhile, Clint returned to enjoying his drink, utterly indifferent to her discomfort. He was simply himself, without the need to prove, explain, or move elsewhere. Here, Rachel, unable to conceal her irritation at Clint's imperturbable calm, changed her tone, this time laced with arrogance. You know, she said, emphasizing each word, this is not some roadside diner. This is the Grand Oak, a place for those who truly understand and appreciate sophistication and class. Clint didn't respond right away. He raised his whiskey glass, took another sip, and kept his gaze steady, his demeanor unshaken, as though Rachel's words hadn't even grazed him. His silence didn't calm Rachel. Instead, it fueled her frustration further. Nearby, Miguel, a young immigrant staff member, quietly observed. He stood frozen, caught in a swirl of emotions. Miguel knew exactly who Clint was. Since childhood, watching Clint Eastwood movies with his father had been some of the most cherished moments of his life. To Miguel, Clint wasn't just an actor. He was a symbol of resilience, strength, and integrity. Unable to stay silent any longer, Miguel stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly, though his voice carried a determined edge. Rachel, he said, trying to maintain his composure, maybe we should let Manager Thomas handle this. Rachel spun around, her gaze sharp as a blade. Miguel, get back to work, she snapped, her tone cold, leaving no room for dissent. This is none of your concern. Clint set his whiskey glass down on the table, his movements slow, but imbued with an indescribable authority. He looked directly at Rachel, his piercing eyes seeming to cut straight to her soul. Miss Rachel, he began, his voice calm and steady, yet laced with a gravity that made the entire room seem to hold its breath. Do you know why I sit here every Friday night? Rachel tried to maintain her composure, a faint, dismissive smirk crossing her lips. I suppose it's because you like this spot, she replied, her tone still carrying a hint of sarcasm, as if attempting to regain control of the conversation. Clint offered a half smile, the same one familiar to audiences around the world from his iconic films. Not exactly, he replied, pausing briefly, each word to come weighted with purpose. I sit here every week because I own this place. The restaurant fell into a stunned silence. A tense, almost electric air swept through the room as the laughter and chatter seemed to evaporate in an instant. A few patrons nearby began to realize who he was, their curious expressions shifting to ones of astonishment. Others exchanged hurried whispers, gesturing toward Clint, their faces alight with surprise. Rachel stood frozen across from him, as if doused with a bucket of ice water. All her arrogance and misplaced confidence crumbled in a single moment. She couldn't speak, her eyes darting from Clint to those around her, searching desperately for some indication that what she just heard was a misunderstanding. Clint said nothing more. He calmly lifted his whiskey glass, took a measured sip, and placed it back on the table, utterly unperturbed by the collective shock. For him, revealing his identity wasn't an act of vanity, but rather a deliberate reminder of a profound truth. In a world obsessed with appearances, real value lies far beyond superficial judgments. Rachel swallowed hard, her face flushing with embarrassment. Her earlier mocking words and condescending attitude now felt like a mirror, reflecting back at her in the harshest way. She wanted to disappear, to escape the weight of her own actions. Bowing her head slightly, she stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know. Clint simply looked at her, his gaze no longer stern but calm, communicating wordlessly that her apology had been accepted. Yet for Rachel, this moment would remain etched in her memory forever. A costly lesson in humility and in learning never to judge a person by their appearance alone. Clint slowly set his whiskey glass down on the table, his gaze shifting to Rachel, who now stood with her head bowed, her face pale. His voice broke the silence, calm yet firm, each word carrying the weight of a profound lesson. "I bought this restaurant for one reason," he said, his eyes growing distant, as if recalling a memory. "To preserve the spirit that Mr. Thompson, the original owner, worked so hard to build 50 years ago. Here, we don't judge customers by what they wear or how many followers they have on social media. We treat everyone with hospitality and respect, values that this place has always upheld." The room fell silent. Clint's words weren't just directed at Rachel. They seemed to ripple outward, touching everyone in the restaurant. A few nearby patrons stopped their conversations, their attention fixed on him. Rachel stood frozen, his words like a mirror, reflecting the arrogance she had shown earlier in the evening. She felt the weight of his unspoken disappointment, leaving her unable to muster even a single word of apology. Clint turned to Miguel, who stood nearby, his expression a mixture of reverence and nervousness. "Miguel," Clint said, his tone gentle yet encouraging, "you understand this. I've been watching the way you work. Would you like to begin training to become a full-time server?" Miguel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored," he stammered, his voice trembling with emotion, overwhelmed by the unexpected opportunity. Clint then shifted his focus back to Rachel, his gaze sharp but no longer angry, carrying instead the stern authority of someone imparting a critical lesson. His voice was steady and deliberate, as though etching his words into the air. "As for you, Rachel," he said, "I'm not going to fire you, but I'm giving you two choices. You can leave and find another place more aligned with your views, or you can stay, learn from Miguel and the veteran staff about the true meaning of hospitality." Rachel lifted her head, her eyes brimming with tears, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mr. Eastwood. I was wrong. I want to stay and learn. Please, give me another chance." Clint nodded slightly, his gaze softening. "Everyone makes mistakes, Rachel. What matters is how we correct them." He stepped closer to Miguel, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "Miguel, you'll oversee her training. Help her understand the core values we uphold here." Miguel looked at Clint, his eyes filled with awe and gratitude. He nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. I'll do my best." Rachel glanced at Miguel, feeling a mix of shame and newfound determination. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just a lesson about her job. It was a life lesson about humility, respect, and the true value of service. An elderly couple seated at a nearby table suddenly began to clap, breaking the stillness in the restaurant. The applause spread, table by table, until the entire space was filled with the sound of heartfelt admiration. It was not only a gesture of respect for Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend sitting quietly among them, but also an acknowledgement of the powerful lesson in dignity and respect he had just imparted. Rachel stood frozen, feeling as though every eye in the room was on her. Yet, instead of shame, a wave of determination rose within her. Clint's lesson wasn't just meant for her. It was a universal reminder that true value lies not in outward appearances, but in how we treat and perceive one another. From that evening onward, the Grand Oak Dining Room was no longer known merely as one of the most luxurious restaurants in Beverly Hills. It became a symbol of deep human values. Those who entered its doors were not only served world-class cuisine, but were also touched by the spirit of genuine hospitality. Clint Eastwood, in his simple polo shirt and composed demeanor, continued to sit at his familiar table every Friday night. He needed no fanfare, no spotlight. His presence alone was a quiet reminder to all: true class resides in our actions, not in our outward image. Under Clint's guidance, Miguel didn't just become a full-time server. He became a role model for humility and a passion for learning. Rachel, after that unforgettable lesson, worked with a completely transformed spirit. She no longer judged customers by their appearances, but instead treated everyone with respect and sincerity. Each evening, as she saw Clint, she reminded herself why she was still there. Not just to work, but to strive to become a better version of herself. The lesson from this story is clear. True value doesn't come from status, attire, or outward glamour, but from the way we treat others. Let go of preconceived notions and focus on spreading kindness and respect. If you ever find yourself visiting the Grand Oak dining room on a Friday evening, keep an eye out for the man in the simple polo shirt seated in the corner. You may find that the greatest lessons often come from the smallest, simplest actions. And who knows, you might leave inspired to treat the people around you a little better, just as Clint Eastwood did.